Female CEO doubted the black Uber driver. She froze when his multilingual skills saved her £300 deal. Michelle Herman didn't even look up when her Uber arrived. She was too busy being a CEO. 48 years old, corner office, 9-figure deals. She had spent 2 decades proving she belonged in rooms where men still paused when she walked in. Every second of her life was scheduled, every outcome calculated. Control wasn't a preference, it was survival. The black man in the driver's seat, late 30s, crisp blue button-down, calm eyes, greeted her as she slid into the front passenger seat. "Good morning, Mom." Michelle glanced at him the way you glance at a traffic light. Something to acknowledge, nothing to remember. JFK. Fast as you can. What Michelle didn't know, the man navigating morning traffic had once navigated international supply chains worth more than her entire company. Her phone rang as they merged onto the expressway. "Michelle, we have a problem." Her legal counsel's voice was tight, strained. "The Spanish investors, they're backing out." Her stomach dropped. "What do you mean, backing out? The meeting is in 3 hours." "There's been a miscommunication, cultural, linguistic, I don't know. They're speaking rapid Spanish and our translator didn't show. Ramirez is trying to handle it, but—" She heard it then. Through the phone speaker, voices overlapping. Fast, heated, words she didn't understand but tones she recognized. Anger, distrust, walls going up. "Michelle, if we lose the Garcia Group, the entire consortium collapses. $300 million are gone." Her hand tightened around the phone. 3 years of negotiations, her legacy, her company's future, crumbling in real time while she sat in an Uber stuck in Manhattan traffic. "Get me someone who speaks Spanish," she hissed. "Anyone. I don't care what it costs. Everyone's booked. There's a UN conference this week. Every qualified interpreter in the city is—" The phone erupted with Spanish again. Louder, sharper. Her counsel fumbled, trying to respond, butchering the language so badly Michelle winced. This was over. She could feel it. And then, from beside her, a voice she'd already forgotten cut through the chaos. Calm, fluent, precise. Spanish. Michelle's head snapped toward the driver. James Francis had the phone pressed to his ear. Her phone somehow, impossibly, and was speaking directly to the investors. Not translating. Negotiating. His posture had shifted, shoulders back, voice carrying a weight that had nothing to do with directions or destinations. "Entendemos sus preocupaciones completamente. Permítanme explicar la posición de Sterling Dynamics con claridad." Michelle stared at him like he'd just sprouted wings. The Spanish voices on the other end softened, paused, listened. James glanced at her briefly, one eyebrow slightly raised, asking permission to continue something he'd already started. Michelle Herman had built her career on being the smartest person in every room. She had never been more grateful to be wrong. What she didn't know yet, what would take the rest of this drive to discover, was that the man saving her $300 million deal had once managed cross-border contracts larger than anything in her portfolio. That he'd learned Spanish not in a classroom but in oil fields and manufacturing plants, negotiating with workers and executives across 3 countries. That life had rerouted him into this driver's seat for reasons that had nothing to do with capability and everything to do with circumstance. But for now, all she could do was watch. And for the first time in a very long time, Michelle Herman shut up and listened. Before I continue with this story, hit that subscribe button now and tell me in the comments where you are watching from, and make sure you enjoy this story to the end. James Francis had learned a long time ago that most people don't really see you. They see the uniform, the role, the category their brain files you under in the first half-second of meeting you. After that, your wallpaper, background, safe to ignore. The woman in his passenger seat, designer suit, diamond necklace, the kind of tension that radiated from people who carried too much weight, had looked at him for maybe a quarter of a second before her eyes slid back to her phone. He wasn't offended. He'd stopped being offended years ago. JFK, fast as you can. Yes, ma'am. James merged into traffic, calm hands on the wheel, eyes reading the road 3 moves ahead the way he'd once read negotiation rooms. The morning was grey, the highway thick with the usual Manhattan crawl. His passenger's jaw was tight. Whatever meeting she was heading to, it mattered. He didn't ask. Uber drivers weren't supposed to ask, but James Francis had never been very good at turning off his brain. 20 years in cross-border logistics will do that to you. You spend enough time managing supply chains between Texas and Mexico, coordinating shipments with manufacturing plants in Monterrey and Sao Paulo, and you develop a 6th sense for tension. You learn to hear what people aren't saying. Right now, the woman beside him was holding her phone like it might explode. Her call connected, and James caught fragments. Legal counsel. Something about investors. Spanish names. Garcia, Vasquez. Numbers that made his ears perk up. $300 million. He kept his eyes forward. None of his business, except... The voice on the other end switched to Spanish, and James's attention sharpened. No entendemos por qué insisten en estos términos. Parece que no respetan nuestra posición. We don't understand why you're insisting on these terms. It seems like you don't respect our position. The counsel on Michelle's end fumbled a response in broken Spanish. Textbook phrases, no feel for the rhythm, no understanding of the cultural weight underneath the words. James winced internally. This wasn't a language problem, it was a trust problem, and whoever was on that call didn't know the difference. Ramirez, what are they saying? The woman's voice was sharp. Controlled panic. They're concerned about the timeline, I think. Something about feeling like we're not respecting their... Wrong. All wrong. James's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. The Spanish voices grew louder, faster. He caught the edge in their tone, not just frustration now, insult. Someone on her team had said something that crossed a line, probably without even knowing it. Esto es típico. Los americanos siempre creen que pueden dictar condiciones. This is typical. Americans always think they can dictate terms. The counsel kept talking, kept digging the hole deeper. Every word made it worse. James felt the old instinct rise in his chest, the one that had guided him through 1,000 negotiations in oil fields and shipping yards and cramped offices where the wrong phrase could collapse a deal. Say something. But he was an Uber driver. Had been for 3 years now, ever since the company restructured and his position evaporated. Since his mother's diagnosis turned his savings into medical bills. Since flexibility became more important than titles. Stay in your lane. The woman beside him, Michelle, he'd heard them call her, was gripping the phone so hard her knuckles had gone white. Ramirez, fix this. I don't care how. Michelle, I'm trying, but they're not. I can't understand half of what they're... Creo que deberíamos reconsiderar este acuerdo por completo. I think we should reconsider this agreement entirely. James's stomach tightened. That was the death sentence. When Spanish-speaking business partners switched to reconsiderar, it meant the door was closing. He'd heard that word end more deals than he could count, and this woman, whoever she was, had no idea she was about to lose everything. Not your problem. 3 years of driving had taught him to stay invisible, to let passengers have their crises in peace, to collect his fare and move on. But $300 million, jobs, futures, all collapsing because nobody in that conversation understood what was actually being said. James looked at her reflection in the window. The woman who hadn't bothered to learn his name, who'd dismissed him before the car even moved. He thought about his daughter, working double shifts to get through school. His mother, fighting through another round of treatment, the stack of bills on his kitchen table. He thought about every time someone had looked past him and seen nothing worth noticing. Then he thought about who he actually was. And James Francis made a choice. He reached over calmly, took the phone from Michelle's startled hand, and spoke. Buenos dias. Mi nombre es James Francis. Entiendo que hay preocupaciones significativas que no han sido abordadas adecuadamente. Michelle Herman's head snapped toward him, mouth open, eyes wide with shock. But James wasn't looking at her. He was already negotiating. Michelle's brain stopped working. That was the only way to describe it. One moment she was spiraling, watching her deal collapse in real time, and the next, her phone was in someone else's hand, and Spanish was pouring out of her Uber driver's mouth like water from a broken dam. Fluent, confident, professional. What the? She reached for the phone instinctively, but something in James's posture made her stop. He wasn't fumbling, wasn't guessing. His voice carried the kind of authority she recognized from her own boardroom, the quiet certainty of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Comprendo perfectamente. Los términos iniciales no reflejaban el nivel de respeto que Sterling Dynamics tiene por su organización. Permítanme aclarar nuestra posición real. The Spanish voices on the other end, the ones that had been rising toward fury, went quiet. Michelle stared at him. Who the hell is this man? Her mind raced backward through the morning, the late pickup, the polite greeting she'd ignored, the calm, unremarkable presence she'd dismissed as, what? Decoration? A means to an end? He was still talking, still negotiating, and the people on the other end were listening. Excuse me. Michelle's voice came out sharper than intended. Excuse me, that's my call. James held up one finger, not rudely, just firmly, the way you'd pause a colleague, not a passenger. Michelle's jaw tightened. Did he just shush me? Through the phone, she heard the lead investor, Garcia, she thought, respond in slower, more measured Spanish. The hostility had dimmed, not gone, but redirected. James nodded as he listened, his eyes still on the road, one hand steady on the wheel. He responded with something that sounded almost apologetic, but not weak. Respectful without groveling. Michelle caught fragments she recognized. Socio, partner, confianza, trust, malentendido, misunderstanding. He was reframing everything, not just translating words, translating intent. Her legal counsel's voice crackled through, confused. Michelle? Michelle, who is that? What's happening? She didn't answer, couldn't, because she was watching her Uber driver do in 60 seconds what her entire advisory team had failed to do in 20 minutes. The Spanish conversation continued. James asked a question, something about timelines, she thought, and the response that came back was calmer still. Someone on the investor's side even laughed. Michelle felt something cold settle in her stomach. My team was losing this deal. And I didn't even know why. The realization hit her like ice water. She had spent 3 years on this negotiation, had hired the best lawyers, the best consultants, the best analysts money could buy, and not one of them, not one, had understood what was actually happening on that call. But this man, this driver. James said something final in Spanish, listened for a moment, then lowered the phone. He glanced at her, calm, unreadable. They're willing to continue the conversation, he said. But there are concerns your team hasn't addressed. Cultural ones. They feel like they've been treated as subordinates, not partners. The language in your preliminary contracts came across as aggressive. Michelle blinked. How do you? Your counsel kept using exigere to demand. In formal Spanish business culture, that's almost confrontational. You use solicitor or proponor if you want to keep doors open. She stared at him. Also, James continued, someone on your team mispronounced Garcia's father's name in an earlier call. Twice. Small thing, but it signaled carelessness, disrespect, even if unintentional. Michelle's mouth opened. Closed. Who are you? The question finally escaped. You speak Spanish? James's expression didn't change. Yes, ma'am. Lived in Texas for a while. Worked across borders. Picked it up properly. Properly. That word landed differently than it should have. There was weight behind it. History. Michelle looked at him. Really looked at him for the first time since she'd gotten in the car. The crisp blue button-down, the steady hands, the quiet confidence that she'd mistaken for what? Subservience? Simplicity? She'd been sitting next to someone extraordinary and hadn't even noticed. Her phone buzzed. Text from Ramirez. What's happening? They're asking to continue in Spanish only. We don't have coverage for this. Michelle read the message twice. The deal was still alive. Barely. But her team couldn't finish what James had started. She looked at him again. At this stranger who had just saved her from disaster and was now simply driving. Like nothing had happened. Pride, she realized. Quiet, unmistakable pride. But no ego. Michelle made a decision. I'm putting the call on speaker, she said, and you're going to help me finish this. James raised an eyebrow. Mom? Please. The word cost her something, and she felt it. I need your help. James held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. Speaker's fine. The phone sat between them on the center console, speaker crackling with voices that held Michelle's future in their hands. James drove with one hand now, his attention split between the road and the conversation unfolding in rapid Spanish. He spoke with an ease that made Michelle's chest tighten, not from anxiety anymore, but from something closer to recognition. Entiendo que la estructura propuesta generó inquietudes sobre el equilibrio de poder en la asociación, James said. Pero creo que hay una oportunidad aquí para redefinir los términos de una manera que beneficie a ambas partes equitativamente. Michelle didn't understand every word, but she understood tone, and the tone on the other end of that call was shifting. Garcia responded, still cautious, but no longer hostile. His voice had dropped from confrontation to something that sounded almost like curiosity. James listened intently, nodding slightly. Then he glanced at Michelle. He wants to know if Sterling Dynamics views this as a true partnership or an acquisition by another name. He says American companies often use partnership language but operate with colonial mindsets. Colonial mindsets. The phrase hit Michelle like a slap. 26 years ago, she had been the only woman in a room full of men who talked over her, around her, through her. She remembered the way they'd smiled when she spoke, patronizing, dismissive, the way they'd rephrased her ideas in their own words and taken credit. She remembered fighting, clawing, proving herself 1,000 times over until they couldn't ignore her anymore. And now, here she was, sitting in an Uber, realizing she had become exactly what she'd once fought against. Tell him! Michelle paused, gathering herself. Tell him that I've spent my entire career being underestimated, that I know what it feels like to have people assume they know your value before you've even spoken, and that I would never build my company on that foundation." James studied her for a moment. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or reassessment. Then he turned back to the call and translated, not word for word, but capturing something essential: the vulnerability, the truth, silence on the other end. Then Garcia spoke again, slower this time, more thoughtful. James translated in real time, his voice low. "He says he appreciates the honesty. He says his father built their company from nothing in a country that didn't believe a man from Oaxaca could compete with corporations from Mexico City. He understands being underestimated." Michelle exhaled. For the first time in 20 minutes, she felt something loosen in her chest. "Ask him what he needs," she said. "Not what the contracts say. What he needs to feel like this is real." James conveyed the question. The response came back thoughtful, measured. He wants meaningful representation on the oversight board, not token positions, actual decision-making power. He wants the initial investment timeline extended by 6 months to allow for cultural integration training for both teams, and he wants a personal commitment from you that you'll visit their operations in Guadalajara within the first quarter. Michelle absorbed each point. Her legal team would have pushed back on all of them. Extended timelines meant delayed returns. Board representation meant shared control. Personal visits meant time away from other priorities. But James had said something earlier that she couldn't shake. They feel like they've been treated as subordinates, not partners. "Done," Michelle said. James raised an eyebrow. "All of it. Tell him done. I'll have my team draft amended terms by end of business today, and I'll personally fly to Guadalajara within 60 days. James translated. The Spanish on the other end erupted, not in anger, but in rapid, overlapping conversation. Multiple voices now, debating, discussing. Michelle waited. The highway stretched ahead, grey and endless. The clock on the dashboard read 8:47. Her flight was in less than 2 hours. The physical meeting she'd been racing toward suddenly felt secondary to what was happening in this car. James listened to the crosstalk, occasionally interjecting with clarifying questions. His posture had shifted completely now, shoulders squared, jaw set with quiet authority. This wasn't a man playing a role. This was who he actually was. The voices on the call gradually settled. One by one, they fell silent until only Garcia remained. He spoke slowly, deliberately. James didn't translate immediately. He listened until the end, his expression unreadable. Then the line went quiet, not disconnected, just waiting. "What did he say?" Michelle asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James turned to look at her fully, the phone still glowing between them. "He said they need to discuss internally, that you've said the right things, but words are easy. He wants to see if the actions match." James paused. "He'll call back in 10 minutes with their decision." 10 minutes. $300 million. Everything. 10 minutes had never lasted so long. Michelle sat motionless, her eyes fixed on the phone between them like it might detonate. Outside, the highway had given way to the familiar sprawl of airport approach roads, rental car lots, parking garages, signs for terminals she'd walked through 1,000 times. None of it registered. James drove in silence, his composure unbroken. He'd asked if she wanted music. She'd shaken her head. Now the only sound was the soft hum of the engine and the distant rumble of planes overhead. 8 minutes. Michelle's mind spiraled through contingencies. If they said no, she'd need to call the board immediately. Restructure the expansion plan. Find alternative funding. Lay off. Don't. She forced herself to breathe. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. The same technique she'd used before every major presentation for the past 2 decades. It wasn't working. 6 minutes. She glanced at James. He was watching the road, face calm, hands steady at 10 and 2. Like this was any other Tuesday, like $300 million wasn't hanging in the balance. How is he so calm? The answer came to her slowly, because he'd been here before. Maybe not in an Uber, maybe not with her. But somewhere, in some boardroom or shipping yard or oil field, this man had stared down stakes this high and walked away intact. She didn't know his story, not yet. But she knew that look. She'd worn it herself once. Before success had made her forget what it felt like to have everything on the line. 4 minutes. James. He glanced at her. Mom? Whatever happens, thank you. Something shifted in his expression. Subtle. A softening around the eyes that was there and gone in an instant. Let's wait and see what happens first. 2 minutes. The airport entrance loomed ahead. James slowed, merging into the departure lane. Terminal signs flickered past. Delta, United, American. Michelle's flight was out of Terminal 4. She should be thinking about check-in, security, the meeting that awaited her on the other side. Instead, she was holding her breath. 1 minute. The phone rang. Michelle's heart stopped, actually stopped, for one terrible eternal second. James pulled smoothly to the curb, put the car in park, and looked at her. No urgency, no pressure. Would you like me to answer? Michelle nodded. Her voice had abandoned her. James picked up the phone, switching seamlessly to Spanish. Buenos días, Señor Garcia. The response came through. Garcia's voice, measured and deliberate. Michelle watched James's face for any sign, any tell. Nothing. He listened, nodded once, responded with a brief phrase she didn't catch. Then Garcia spoke again, a longer statement this time. Michelle caught fragments, compromiso, acuerdo, adelante, but couldn't piece them together fast enough. James's expression didn't change. Oh God, it's over. They said no. Then Garcia said something that made James close his eyes, just for a moment. A breath of something that might have been relief. Gracias, Señor Garcia. Se lo comunicaré inmediatamente. He ended the call. Silence. Michelle couldn't move, couldn't speak. Couldn't do anything but stare at this man who held her entire future in his next words. They're in, James said simply. Full terms accepted. They'll have their legal team send confirmation within the hour. The world went white. Not literally. Michelle's vision didn't fail. But something inside her cracked open, and for a moment, everything else fell away. The airport, the car, the flight she was supposed to catch, $300 million. Saved. Oh my God! The words escaped before she could stop them. Her hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God! James said nothing. He didn't celebrate, didn't gloat, didn't seek acknowledgement. He simply sat there, hands resting on the wheel, giving her space to feel whatever she needed to feel. Michelle's eyes burned. Don't cry. Do not cry. She failed. One tear slipped down her cheek, then another. She wiped them away furiously, embarrassed, overwhelmed. This wasn't who she was. She didn't break down. She didn't fall apart. She was Michelle Herman. She was composed. But right now, in this Uber, with this stranger who had just saved everything, she was human. I almost lost it all, she whispered. And I didn't even know why. James met her eyes. His gaze was steady, kind, utterly without judgment. You didn't lose it. Because of you. He shook his head slowly. Because you were willing to listen. The words landed somewhere deep in Michelle's chest and stayed there. Outside, planes roared overhead, carrying people to meetings and mergers and moments that would define their lives. Inside the car, Michelle Herman sat in silence with a man she'd dismissed as invisible, and understood, finally, what she had almost missed. Neither of them moved to open the door. The airport hummed around them, luggage wheels on concrete, announcements echoing through terminal speakers, the endless shuffle of travelers rushing toward gates. Michelle's flight was boarding in 90 minutes. She should go. She didn't. James? His name felt different in her mouth now. Heavier. Real. Where did you learn to do that? He was quiet for a moment, watching a plane lift off in the distance. 15 years in cross-border logistics, he said finally. Started in Texas, managing supply chains between the US and Mexico. Trucking mostly, then manufacturing contracts, automotive parts, industrial equipment. Spent time in Monterrey, Guadalajara, Sao Paulo. Michelle listened. Really listened. Spanish wasn't optional, James continued. You don't survive in that world with phrase books and translators. You learn the language, you learn the culture, you learn that the words people say are only half the conversation. And the other half? History, pride, trust. He shrugged slightly. Things that don't translate. Michelle nodded slowly. Everything he'd done on that call made sense now. He hadn't just spoken Spanish, he'd spoken respect, a language her legal team had never bothered to learn. What happened? She asked. How did you end up? She trailed off, suddenly aware of how the question might sound. How did someone like you end up driving someone like me? James didn't seem offended. Company restructured. My whole division got cut. Happens. His voice was matter-of-fact, but she caught the ghost of something beneath it. My mother got sick around the same time. Cancer. Treatment's expensive, even with insurance. I'm sorry. Don't be. She's fighting. She's strong. A small smile flickered across his face. Daughters in medical school, following in the footsteps of the doctors who saved her grandmother's life. That's what the driving pays for. Michelle felt something twist in her chest. This man, this brilliant, capable, multilingual professional, was working 16-hour days so his daughter could become a doctor and his mother could survive. And Michelle had looked at him this morning and seen nothing. James, I need to say something. He turned to face her, expression open, waiting. I didn't see you. The words came out rough, honest. When I got in this car, I looked right through you. I made assumptions about who you were, what you were capable of, based on nothing but... She stopped, struggling. Based on nothing. James held her gaze. His face betrayed no anger, no satisfaction at her confession, just quiet understanding. I know, he said. How can you be so calm about that? Because it happens every day. His voice was gentle, but the truth in it was sharp. Every single day, Ms. Herman, you're not the first, you won't be the last. The words hit her like stones dropped into still water, ripples spreading outward. That's not an excuse, she said. No, it's not. James paused. But you listened when it mattered. Most people don't even do that. Michelle shook her head. That's a low bar. It's the bar we've got. Silence settled between them again. Outside, a shuttle bus rumbled past. A family hurried toward the terminal, children laughing, oblivious to the weight of the conversation happening feet away. Michelle reached into her bag and pulled out her wallet. She took out several bills, far more than the fare, and held them out. James looked at the money, then at her. That's not necessary, Ma'am. It's not enough, Michelle said. But please, take it. After a moment he accepted. No ceremony, no false humility, just acknowledgement. Then Michelle did something that surprised them both. She pulled out a business card, her personal one, the one she gave to board members and heads of state, and handed it to him. "If you ever want to talk professionally," she said, "call me. I mean it." James took the card, studied it briefly, then tucked it into his shirt pocket. "I might do that." "Please do." He nodded once, and something passed between them. Not friendship, not yet, but the beginning of something. Recognition, respect. Michelle gathered her bag and opened the door. The airport noise rushed in. Announcements, engines, the chaos of a world that never stopped moving. She paused, one foot on the curb. "James?" "Yes, Mom. Thank you for everything." He smiled. It was the first real smile she'd seen from him all morning. Warm, unhurried. The smile of a man who had long ago made peace with the gap between who he was and how the world saw him. "Have a safe flight, Ms. Herman." Michelle stepped out of the car and walked toward the terminal. She didn't look back. But something had shifted inside her, something fundamental and irreversible. She had boarded this ride as one kind of leader. She would land as another. 6 weeks later, Michelle Herman sat at the head of a mahogany conference table, watching her team prepare for the quarterly review. The Garcia deal had closed, $300 million secured. Sterling Dynamics was expanding into 3 new markets, and the business press had called it the most significant logistics partnership of the decade. Michelle's name was on the headlines, her face was on the covers. But every time someone congratulated her, she thought about a blue button-down shirt and steady hands on a steering wheel. "Michelle, we're ready to begin." She nodded, pulling herself back to the present. Around her sat vice presidents, analysts, consultants, the machinery of corporate success. Smart people, credentialed people. The kind of people she'd spent her career surrounding herself with. But now she looked at them differently. Who else is in this room that I'm not seeing? It had become a habit, a quiet discipline she'd developed since that morning in the Uber. In meetings, she'd started asking questions she never used to ask. Not just, "What's your analysis?" but "What's your perspective?" Not just, "Where did you go to school?" but "What did you do before this?" She'd discovered that her junior analyst had spent 5 years teaching in rural Guatemala, that her operations manager had grown up translating for her immigrant parents at doctor's appointments, that the security guard who opened the building every morning had a master's degree in philosophy from a university in Lagos. Talent was everywhere. She'd just stopped looking. The meeting proceeded. Numbers were reviewed. Projections were analyzed. Michelle listened, contributed, led. But part of her mind was elsewhere. 3 days after the airport ride, she had called the number on James's Uber profile, asked if they could meet for coffee. He'd said yes. They met at a quiet cafe in Brooklyn. No suits, no boardrooms, just 2 people talking across a small table, finally seeing each other clearly. She'd offered him a job. Full-time, executive compensation, a title that matched his abilities. James had listened carefully, then he'd shaken his head. "I appreciate it, Ms. Herman, truly, but I'm not looking to be rescued." "This isn't rescue, it's recognition." "Maybe." He'd smiled slightly. "But I've got my mother's treatment to manage, my daughter's graduation to see. I need flexibility more than I need a corner office." Michelle had understood, more than she expected to, so they'd found another arrangement, consulting, project-based. James would advise on cross-cultural negotiations, help train her international teams, serve as a bridge between the words people said and the meanings they carried. No title, no hierarchy, just work that mattered, paid fairly, on his terms. He'd accepted. Now, 6 weeks later, Michelle's team included someone the org chart didn't quite capture, a name that appeared on select meeting invites, a voice that joined critical calls, a presence that had quietly reshaped how Sterling Dynamics approached the world. James never sought credit, never mentioned the morning that started it all. When colleagues asked how he'd connected with the CEO, he simply said, "We met through work." And in a way, that was true. The meeting ended. Michelle's team filed out, already focused on their next tasks. She stayed behind, standing at the window, looking down at the street below. A black sedan pulled up to the building entrance. Someone climbed out, a man in a crisp blue shirt carrying a laptop bag. He paused on the sidewalk, looked up at the building, then walked inside. James, here for the strategy session on the Guadalajara expansion. Michelle watched until he disappeared through the doors. She thought about that morning, the grey sky, the crawling traffic, the phone call that nearly destroyed everything. She thought about the assumptions she'd carried into that car, the invisible walls she'd built without even knowing it, the talent she'd dismissed because it didn't match the picture in her head. James hadn't saved her company. He'd saved her, not from bankruptcy, not from failure, but from becoming the kind of leader who couldn't see what was right in front of her. The kind of person who measured worth by titles and credentials and forgot that brilliance doesn't announce itself. It simply waits to be noticed. Michelle turned from the window and headed toward the conference room where James was setting up. She had a meeting to attend, a partnership to build, a company to run. But more than that, she had a new way of leading to practice. One that started with a simple discipline. Look closer, listen harder. See the person, not the role. It wasn't enough to fix the world, but it was enough to change her corner of it. And that, Michelle had learned, was where transformation always began.